Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Simplify. Today, we're asking an important question. Can he actually do that? Now, I'm talking about President Trump. I'm also talking about how Trump has related to the current Fed Chairman Powell. This is a really interesting development. It's one that a number of months ago emerged as a headline, and then it died out amongst all the other headlines that were really focused more on tariffs and some of the other rather crazy things that seem to be happening day to day in this current administration. Now, to circle back on Chairman Powell, earlier this week, headlines emerged that the president once again is starting to consider ways in which he can fire the chairman from his position and bring in a new candidate. Now, presidents are allowed the ability, once a term ends of a sitting chairman, to select a new chairman of the Federal Reserve. Now, that nomination is for 4 years. And so sitting presidents, when they have the opportunity to select a new chairman of the Federal Reserve, do so usually sometime mid-cycle. I think right now we're expecting this to happen next May. But as many of you know, President Donald Trump seems to have his own idea about what is acceptable. We'll be talking about some of the legal reasons why the Fed chairman is protected, and then some of the bigger question marks. So I want to talk about some of the reasons why this is unlikely. Now, the very first is the Federal Reserve Act. Now, this act was designed to protect the Federal Reserve, to make it an independent entity from political motivations. And so the chairman who is selected under this act serves a 4-year term, as previously mentioned, but then also has a position on the board of directors, and I think that term is around 14 years. So this individual will have a collective contribution of 14 years, but serve as the president for those 4 years of the original term. Now, this act does protect this individual from any meddling of the president or any political force outside of the Federal Reserve for very specific reasons. The entire credibility of a central bank is predicated upon its ability to be separated out from political motivations. And so if it is seen as affected or manipulated by a political party, that would undermine the credibility that this central bank, the US central bank, has globally. This would be a big problem for us, especially as we try to sell treasury bills, which is essentially US debt that we sell to entities who are in turn given a small interest guaranteed return. And so countries and individuals and corporations are often willing to buy up treasury bills because it's a guaranteed and very safe, considered to be very safe return on their investment that isn't necessarily exposed to volatility of the marketplace. Now, this act also talks about ways in which the Fed chairman can be removed. And specifically, this person can only be removed for cause. Now, this is where things get interesting. What actually is cause? I would say that there would have to be some considerable legal concern, something like corruption was discovered with the Fed chairman, or collusion with another entity, some sort of very specific and devious act. If it's just a disagreement on policy and the Fed chairman has one position on interest rates, for example, and keeping them flat right now, versus President Donald Trump, who is arguing for up to a 300-point reduction, which would equate to a 3% reduction in the actual Fed Reserve interest rate. That's just a policy disagreement, and that is not cause for removing the Fed chairman. Now, another key point here is that institutional independence is critical for the success of the Federal Reserve as a central bank. It needs to be seen as independent from political motivations, and its operations need to be separated out from anything that might be perceived as manipulative or somehow aligned with one position over the other. Now, this is to preserve the perception that the central bank is a safe, steady entity that is not going to be changing its position with every new political party and argument that emerges around its policy. And finally, I want to mention that historically, there is absolutely no precedent for removing an acting chair of the Fed. This has never been done by any president to actively remove for cause a sitting chairman. So if President Trump does decide that this course of action is appropriate, this would be the first time in history that something like that has ever happened. Now, this administration is not new to creating new precedents. They are exceedingly willing to try new things and do different things that do not jive with historical precedent. And so therein lies the concern that most people have. And I think in general, people are taking this threat seriously. Now, we honestly don't know what to believe with this administration. There are positions that are reversed overnight for seemingly no reason at all. There are things that are said that die down or perhaps are used as a political distraction to take away from other headlines, Epstein files, for instance, that are ongoing in the news cycle. So it comes down to complete chance. I'd say it's a 50-50 chance right now that Chairman Powell actually sees out his entire term. Now, the one thing that I can tell you for a fact is that the markets are not predicting that Chairman Powell is fired. The markets are completely ignoring this particular development. Now, that wasn't the case a number of months ago when this news first started to emerge. The markets were starting to react in very slight ways. This time around, it is a non-issue. Now, this could be problematic if something ultimately does happen. If the chairman is relieved of duty, there could be some fairly big movements in the market, but that really depends on the other financial data that's available at the time. In other words, how is the job market? What are the underlying financial conditions that might impact us in one way or the other? Because the Fed rate does not necessarily directly correlate with things that matter most to Americans day to day. It certainly plays a role in, let's say, how your mortgage rate is set or car loans, but it's not the only factor to consider because there are other influences that change those rates outside of just the Fed rate as we know it. So if you made it this far in the video, I'd love to hear your opinion down below. What do you think will happen? I personally think that Chairman Powell will likely serve out the rest of his term, and then a new person will be put into position. Now, perhaps Chairman Powell will continue, especially given the inflation data that was released this week showing that inflation is increasing. It's running a little bit hot right now. I think his policy to stay the course without lowering the interest rates makes a lot of sense, and now is backed by market data that will continue to reinforce this position, making it harder and harder for President Trump to overtly make a move against Chairman Powell. But you never know. This could change overnight. We could have a new chairman in by next month or sooner. And if this happens, it's likely going to be an individual who is somewhat subservient or in line with President Trump's position. This could result in some very big changes by the end of the year in our economic situation. And it's really hard to predict how this might impact markets, how the markets will react, and how they're going to build in some of the uncertainty around these big issues. I love following these types of stories, so you don't have to in detail. I think as a common consumer of financial independence information, this is a story I would recommend you not worry too much about. Even if we had more leanings towards one direction or the other, it's still nearly impossible to predict how this will impact your investments. And so I recommend no drastic changes in portfolios right now. I think staying the course with whatever philosophy you've decided is right for you when it comes to investing is likely the philosophy you should continue to promote. Until information proves otherwise, Right now is not the time to panic. Really, this could go either way. It's a total crapshoot and essentially akin to gambling. So whatever you decide to do, make sure it aligns with your personal philosophy. Don't make any rash decisions based upon headlines, especially around Donald Trump's behavior, because I think that we all know by now that's rather unpredictable, maybe for a reason, maybe for no reason at all, and it's just his personality. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I recommend staying the course and ignoring the headline. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please like it. Again, provide a comment below, subscribe to the channel. I'll look forward to seeing you next week.